learning the cultures was probably the hardest part, because all of my companions were, except for one, were native of Singapore, Hong Kong, or Taiwan, and so they had their own culture. And then we were living in Australia, which was not my native culture. It was an English-speaking culture, and then we were teaching the Chinese people. And so it was a lot of learning how to balance the different cultures. Australian culture is very laid back. It's very... the white Australians in general, if they're not LDS or Catholic, are very anti-religion. But they're very nice people. They're just like, I'm not interested in God. He has nothing to give me. And then Asians in general have no idea about God. And they're very studious, and they were very hard workers. And family is the most important thing in their life. And so it was an interesting, it was very hard to try to intermingle the two, the laid-back Australian culture with these strict Asians. And so that was hard, but as I got to learn the strictness of the Asian culture and the relaxed nature of the Australian culture and see some of them combined together, it really was a testimony to me that we're all God's children, that we can all get along, because you would see these Australian families just embrace the Asians, and especially the Chinese members, and just help them relax or help them have a family while they were in Australia, because a lot of them, Asians were, and the Chinese people were students, and so their families weren't there. And so the Australians would kind of adopt them into their family, which was really cool to see. In the Chinese program, we had rice every day. And it took me a while to learn how to cook rice properly. I didn't know I'd been cooking it wrong my whole life. My first companion was from Taiwan, and she taught me how to clean the rice thoroughly, and then how to make rice on a stovetop rather than in a rice cooker. And so we ate rice every day. Australian food is very bland compared to American food, and so there's not a lot of sugar, but the bread is delicious. And so my companion and I, we would love to get, we had a lady that would bring us bread every Sunday. So we'd eat this fresh bread, and it has lots of grains and sunflower seeds and flax in it. And we would get Nutella and put it on top of that. It's for the sweetness, because that was the sweetest thing I could find in Australia, was Nutella and Tim Tams, which are a little cooked chocolate biscuit type thing, which is really good. The weirdest thing I ate on my mission was probably pig's feet. We had a member who had been baptized recently, and her parents came to visit her from China. And her mom thought that the missionaries were such a huge blessing to her daughter that she wanted to cook us all dinner. And so she invited us over. And it was great food until we got to the pig's feet. And it was the main course of the meal. Yeah, so my first area was in the suburbs, and so we had a flat, but it was more like what Americans would consider a condo. It was 2 stories, 3 bedrooms, and there were 2 of us living in it. And it had no air conditioning, and it gets up to like 40 degrees Celsius in Australia, which is about 120 Fahrenheit. And so it was sweltering. And then when I was in the city, I had a little tiny flat, and there were 4 sister missionaries living in this flat. And it was so small that we had to put all 4 of our beds in the living room and then just use the bedrooms for our study rooms. And it was right next to this big rugby stadium. And so once or twice a month, there would be a game at this rugby stadium. And we would have to go in early on those days and lock the doors, because it was on a Friday or a Saturday, and make sure everything was locked, because drunk people, Australians, love rugby and beer together. And so they would get super drunk, and then they would go to the rugby game, and we're sitting there trying to fall asleep, and you hear the cheers and this excitement of the rugby game, and then it ends, and they're walking home, and they're yelling outside of your window. And one time we had someone come and bang on our door, and that was pretty scary, but luckily it was locked, so we were all good. But living in the city was definitely something I'd never experienced before, because I'm kind of from a little country place in South Carolina, so it was definitely those were some scary like nights, just laying in bed trying to fall asleep, but you couldn't because it was just so noisy.